To really understand why the first two creation accounts of the Old Testament are so different from each other, we need to understand who wrote them. The priestly authors were responsible for Genesis 1, and the Yahwistic authors were responsible for Genesis 2. These two groups had very different writing styles, which are easily discernible from each other. The priestly authors were concerned with the temple and priestly matters. As was discussed in episode 13, they were active during the Babylonian exile, specifically the late 5th century BCE. They reinterpreted many of the Babylonian myths from a Jewish perspective. Typically, the priestly authors had a more formal writing style, often making use of lists. They portrayed God from a distance and used the impersonal name Elohim when referring to the divine, translated to God in later Bible translations. The Yahwistic authors worked over a long period of time. They started to document Israel's history as early as the 9th century BCE. They revised this history right into the Babylonian exile. The Jahvists' writing style was more relaxed than the formal style of the priestly authors. They portrayed God as a personal God with human characteristics and referred to the divine on his personal name of Yahweh, translated to Lord or Lord God. Getting into the stories themselves, we find multiple differences. Of course, we also need to note that these narratives were based on different myths. Genesis 1 was partly based on the epic of Enuma Elish, and Genesis 2 partly based on the epic of Gilgamesh. In Genesis 1, the priestly authors tells how Elohim created all of creation from a distance, through his words or commands. In Genesis 2, however, Yahweh created everything by using his hands. Man was created from clay, in the same way Enkidu in the epic of Gilgamesh was created, where after Yahweh breathed life into him. Throughout Genesis 2, we see how the Yahwists portray Yahweh as a personal, human God who walks with man in the Garden of Eden. This is in stark contrast to Elohim, who never comes into direct contact with his creation. Before creation began, we read in Genesis 1 how the earth was formless and covered by a dark chaotic mass of primordial water, linking to Apsu and Tiamat, the first entities of primordial water in the epic of Enuma Elish. In Genesis 2, earth is portrayed as an empty desert without water, plants, or humans. In line with the priestly author's love for lists and formality, the whole of Genesis 1 creation account happens over 6 days, with God resting on the seventh day. In contrast, the Yahwists do not specify how long the Genesis 2 creation narrative lasted. The order in which everything was created differs between the two creation accounts. Genesis 1 gives the order as first plants, then animals, and lastly humans, with man and woman being created at the same time. In Genesis 2, man is created first, then plants, then animals, and lastly woman. Lastly, the final outcome of creation is different between the two creation accounts. Creation in Genesis 1 is similar to a cosmic temple, with its references to a three-tiered structure, with all living beings created in between the waters above and the waters below. Again, this part of Genesis 1 is parallel with the epic of Enuma Elish, where Marduk cuts Tiamat in half, the top of her holding the waters up and the bottom keeping the waters down, with a gap in the middle where people, animals, and plants could live. In Genesis 2, creation is depicted as a garden on the eastern horizon. In turn, this image of creation aligns with the epic of Gilgamesh, where Enkidu lived in a place called Eden, in a complete harmony with all the animals and plant life. To read these two creation accounts as a retelling of the same story is unfortunately not accurate and do these stories no justice. They are valuable and unique in their own right and should be treated as such, each written in their own time by different authors with different intentions. In the next episode, we will see how the exiled Judeans found their way to Judah from Babylonia.